Hello everyone, my name is Neha Sukhija. I am from the Department of Buddhist Study of University of Delhi. Today I am going to discuss about module number 1 of paper number 12, Philosophy of Buddhism 1. This module is designed to make you familiar with the topic called Critical Study of Philosophy of Knowledge. This is the most important topic in all philosophical topics. So, the word philosophy means love of wisdom or love of learning. Philosophy has many branches like metaphysics, epistemology, logic, ethics, religion, and so on. So the branch which deals with the knowledge is epistemology. So epistemology is also known as the theory of knowledge. The main problems which epistemology deals with: how far can know the reality, how does knowledge can develop, and the last problem is what are the different sources of knowledge, which in Sanskrit known as pramana. Now, in Indian philosophy, all philosophical schools, whether it is Buddhist or non-Buddhist, aim at searching truth in their own way. Pramana Shastra, which is known as sources of valid knowledge, has played an important role in all the schools of Indian philosophy. Why? Because without pramana or without evidence or proof, nothing can be given and accepted. We can see in our real life also, without evidence and proof, we cannot accept anything. So, pramana basically means the ability to generate valid knowledge. Valid knowledge is also known as prama in Sanskrit. Now, all pramanas have particular way of expressing knowledge, and each pramana shows a different type. In total, there are 6 valid means of knowledge, that is pramana. These 6 valid means of knowledge adopted by different schools of Indian philosophy. They are: the first one is perception, which is known as pratyaksha in Sanskrit. The second one is inference, which in Sanskrit known as anumana. The third one is comparison, which in Sanskrit known as upamana. The fourth one is verbal testimony, which in Sanskrit known as shabda. The fifth one is postulation, which in Sanskrit known as arthapatti. And the last one is non-apprehension, which in Sanskrit known as anuplabdhi. Now the Buddhists at the time of Dignaag, who was a famous Buddhist philosopher, adopted only 2 pramanas, that is sources of knowledge. They are perception and inference. They reduce verbal testimony and reasoning by analogy or comparison into inference. Now the main difference between these 2 pramanas, which means perception and inference of valid knowledge, is in Buddhist school is radical one, a real one, and a transcendental one. What is apprehended by senses is never liable to cognition by inference, and what is apprehended by inference can never be liable to cognition by the senses. For example, when a fire which is present in the perception and apprehended by the sense of sight, it is a situation of sense perception for the realist. Realist is like Nyaya school. Or when the same fire is beyond perception and its existence apprehended only indirectly, which means not directly, because same smoke is being perceived and fire is apprehended by inference. So this is the difference between these sources. Now let us discuss about perception. Perception, which is also known as pratyaksha, is regarded to be a pramana, which means a means of valid knowledge. The word pratyaksha comprised of two words, that is prati, which means near, and aksha, which means eye. So pratyaksha indicated the knowledge occurring through the medium of eyes. Further, used as an adjective, pratyaksha indicates that which is direct and immediate. As a noun, it indicates immediate knowledge. So, we can say perception is a immediate knowledge. Perception also describes knowledge generated from the direct contact of five senses with their object. Dignaag, who was a famous Buddhist philosopher, developed the epistemology of Yogacara school. Dignaag is also known as the father of medieval logic in India, was a great scholar of Indian philosophy. Vasubandhu, who was also a great philosopher, was a teacher of Dignaag. Under his guidance, Dignaag got mastery of Vijnanavada theory and of logic. He wrote many books, of which the most important one in which he discussed the epistemology of his school is Pramana Samuchaya. The work Pramana Samuchaya is deal with logic, epistemology, and semantic. In the work Pramana Samuchaya, Dignaag has discussed the theory of knowledge in general. For him, there are two means of valid knowledge. They are immediate and meditate. Immediate is perception and meditate is inference. They are only two because the particular and the universal are only two aspects by which an object can be apprehended. Now, Dignaag defines perception as pratyaksham kalpana podam. I would like to repeat this again. Pratyaksham kalpana podam, which in Sanskrit we can translate it as perception is free from conceptual construction. According to Dignaag, a thing, or we can say an object, can be expressed by a word only when that thing or an object connected with a name and other factors. Why? Because a thing is unable to express in itself. Conceptual construction, which means kalpana, is a process of connecting name with a thing and nothing else. So kalpana is enough to exclude inference, which is invariably connected with conceptual construction. Kalpana is also sufficient to exclude errors and illusions from the class of perception. Errors and illusions can be free from conceptual construction, but they are never agreeing with facts. So perception as a source of valid knowledge presupposes as an essential requirement this agreement of fact with knowledge. But whereas errors and illusions do not allow verification, which is the only important condition of agreement. So one should not be confused the errors and illusion with the valid knowledge. So we can say the definition of perception, which means pratyaksham kalpana podam, is given by Dignaag, is self-verified and self-sufficient. Now Dharamkirti, who was also a famous Buddhist philosopher, his famous works are Pramanavartika and Nyayabindu. Dharamkirti in his work Nyayabindu, which is about Buddhist logic and epistemology, has divided all valid knowledge into two categories. That is perception, which means pratyaksha, and inference, which means anumana. He says all human actions relies for their achievement on true and valid knowledge. In his work Pramanavartika, he agrees with Dignac in defining perception. That is, perception is free from conceptual construction. But in Nyaya Bindu, he joins the term abharanta, which means non-erroneous, to this definition. In Nyaya Bindu, Dharamkirti explains, or we can say define, perception as a presentation determined by the object and free from all kind of ideal elements, which means kalpana. So kalpana is also known as conceptual construction, ideal elements. So Dharamkirti says it is called nirvikalpa or indeterminate stage of perception. Why? Because savikalpa or determinate stage of perception includes the ideal elements, which means kalpana. So there are two stages of perception, that is nirvikalpa and savikalpa. Dignac does not refute savikalpa, but it takes the realm of inference. So for Dharamkirti, perception is made up of apprehension of object in its own special character, which is known as swalakshana, which have no similarity with other objects. So it is totally unique. So it is totally free from any kind of connection with names and verbal expression. Why? Because such connection usually presupposes and it is also made by relational thought. The reality, which is the object of perception, which is immediately shown to the mind and not to some other ideas like generality, quality, action, substratum, name, which are not a component of presented sense data, but they are provided by imagination. In Pramanavartika, Dharamkirti also make distinction between Swalakshana and Samalya Lakshana, which are the two very important aspects by which an object can be apprehended or we can say cognized. So let us discuss what is the difference between Swalakshana and Samanya Lakshana. Swalakshana has potency to generate effects, whereas Samanya Lakshana do not have any potency to produce effects. Swalakshana is unique, definite and particular, whereas Samanya Lakshana is not unique, not definite but universal. Swalakshana cannot be denoted by a word, whereas Samanya Lakshana can be denoted by a word. Swalakshana is cognizable without relying on other factors like verbal expression, whereas Samanya Lakshana is not cognizable without relying on other factors like verbal expression. So this is the difference between Swalakshana and Samanya Lakshana. Now according to Dharamkirti, perception can be divided into four classes or categories. The first one is sense perception, which in Sanskrit known as Indriya. The second one is mental perception, which in Sanskrit known as Manovigyana. The third one is self-cognition, which in Sanskrit known as Swa-Samvedna. The last one is supersensuous perception of yogins. So these are the four classes of perception. Now comes inference. So let us discuss about what is inference. In definition of inference, we can say inference can be characterized as that knowledge of a thing through its mark. Another definition of inference is the knowledge of an inferred. All things, all objects can be divided into two. That is, present are known by perception, whereas the object that divided into absent are known by inference. Further, in the definition of inference, we can say inference knows the universal, whereas on the other hand, perception knows the object that is particular. So according to Dignaag and Dharamkirti, inference can be divided into two kinds, that is Swartha Anumana and Parartha Anumana. Swartha Anumana is inference for the purpose for one's own self, whereas Parartha Anumana is inference for the purpose of others. The former, which is Swartha Anumana, is characterized or defined as the deduction of the probandum, which is the inferable thesis, from the reason endowed with threefold characteristics, which are as follows. The first characteristic is the reason or middle term must exist in the subject or the minor term. The second characteristic is the reason must exist merely in cases that are homologous. The third one characteristic is the reason must not exist in the cases that are heterologous. So for Buddhists or for Dignaag, the infallible postulation is the subject of which the probandum is looked to be predicated. Also, the homologue is one that constantly has the probandum alongside the probans or reason. The heterologue is one which is the homologue's inverse, which means which does not have the probandum and the probans whenever. Now, if a specific reason or a probans, or we can say in Sanskrit hetu, is comprehended to have these triple characteristics, it will constantly and without any mistake lead to the information of the probandum. But what is the method for realizing that a specific probans would have the triple characteristics? Now, according to Dharamkirti, there are three reasons that can fulfill these triple characteristics, or we can say condition. They are a reason which is similar in a sense with the probandum, Swabhav Hetu. The second is which is an effect or impact. And lastly, non-perception. Now, the second kind of inference, which is known as Parartha Anumana, agrees with Swartha Anumana in all the characteristics. The main and the chief difference in both these kinds of Anumana is Parartha Anumana, the inferential procedure must be placed verbally in premises. Now, this is all about the definition of inference. Now, let us discuss about the subject matter of inference. The inference works with three terms. The first one is the subject, the second one is the predicate, and the third one is the probans. So, there ought to be exist an invariable and unequivocal relation between the probans and the probandum. These are the main conditions that are important for any kind of inference. Now, one can question that what are the objective and correct matter of inference? Now, this main issue was attacked by Dignaag in his work Pramanya Samuchaya. He says there are few logicians who believe that the predicate which is the probandum is the subject. This issue was attacked by Dignaag in his work Pramanya Samuchaya. He says there are few logicians who believes that the predicate which is the probandum is the object of inference, which is invariably connected with the probans. And other logicians again think that the association that is inferred and neither the subject nor the predicate on the grounds that they are known by other proof. But according to Dignag, both these views are incorrect. Why? Because if the probens is known not perpetually joined with the probandum, the later is of now known at the time of association was apprehended. In the event that it is contended that the predicate was not known as identified with the subject, well, let then the subject along these lines qualified be viewed as probandum. Now the subject matter of inference is also cannot be the association, or we can say connection, because it does not include the two terms, the probens and the probandum, in its fold like the subject. Further, the relation cannot be expressed as the probandum in the syllogism either by a name or through a case finishing. Also, the probens do not have any connection with relation. Further, the relation is implicitly contained in the probandum and need not to be expressed. Thus, it cannot be the subject, the predicate, and the relation that is inferred. However, it is the subject as qualified by the predicate that is inferred on the basis of invariable relation between the probens and the probandum observed somewhere else. Now, Akshapada states that there are 5 members in a syllogism. They are, the first one is proposition, which in Sanskrit known as pratigya. The second one is reason, which in Sanskrit known as hetu. The third one is example, which in Sanskrit known as udharana. The fourth one is application, which in Sanskrit known as upanaya. And the last one is conclusion, which in Sanskrit known as nigmana. Now these sentences are not separated, detached statements, but they are nearly woven together by common necessity, and so they form a complex judgment. There was a various opinion considering the number of premises in syllogism. Dharamkirti rejected the conclusion as a part of syllogism, whereas for Vatsyayana, the member of syllogism are 10 in number. Again, the Vedantis, who was a famous Indian scholars, only accepts the first 3 or the last 3 members. Again, the modern Jainas accept that 2 propositions can form a syllogism. And the Buddhist also agrees with modern Jainas, that is, 2 propositions can form a syllogism. But they would differ on the form and the nature of the syllogism. Now let us discuss about these members of syllogism. As I have told you earlier, the first one is proposition. What is proposition? Proposition is the statement of the proposal that is to be proved. For example, word is impermanent. The second one is statement of reason, comprises in adducing a fact capable of proving the probandum. For example, because word has a definite origin, it is known as hetu. The third one is example. Example is a familiar instance which is known to possess the probandum by probative reason, which it has just the same as the subject or the minor term. Example, a thing having a definite origin is seen to be impermanent. For example, a pot. This is udharana. The next comes application. Application of the reason to subject after its probative word has been confirmed in the case. Example, word has a definite origin as similar to pot, which is also impermanent. And the last one is conclusion. Conclusion is the restatement of the thesis along with the statement of reason connected to it. For example, therefore, word is impermanent because it has a definite origin. So, this is known as nigmana or conclusion. Now, the Buddhist reduces the syllogism into two members, the universal proposition with the example labeled on and the minor premise. In the Buddhist syllogism, as discovered by Dignaga and Dharamkirti, the mental factors were eliminated and the syllogism got a sensible shape. Now, this is all about perception and inference. These both are known as sources of knowledge. Now, let us discuss about the controversy between Nyaya school and Buddhism on the view of perception and inference. First of all these two schools, Nyaya and Buddhism, they differ on the sources of knowledge. As I have told earlier that there are 6 valid means of knowledge, out of which the Nyaya school accepts 4 sources of knowledge. They are perception, inference, comparison and verbal testimony. Whereas on the other hand, Buddhist adopts only true pramanas, which means sources of knowledge, that are perception and inference. And they reduce verbal testimony and comparison into inference. The second controversy comes is these two schools also differ on the theory of perception. The Nyaya schools holds the position of realist, whereas on the other hand, Buddhists hold the position of anti-realist. According to Nyaya school, perception involves both sensation and conception. According to them, after the mere sensation of the object by the sense organs, we bring this raw sensation. Now, according to them, after the mere sensation of the object by the sense organs, we bring this raw sensation under various concepts like naming, shaping, etc. Then one can say we are said to have perceived an object. They define perception as indriyat sannikarsho utpanam jnanam avyapadesham avyabhichari vyavsayaatmak. Means the knowledge is generated by the contact of sense and object, which is inexpressible, non-erroneous and of a determinate nature. This school holds that everything is given outside. The thing or an object appears as it is. Whereas on the other hand, Buddhist says that the object does not exist which it appears to us. According to them, perception is mere sensation. It does not include any conception, which means kalpana. Buddhist takes kalpana in the realm of inference. According to Buddhists, a thing which has many properties cannot be cognized in all its aspects by the senses. Why? Because the sense can only get the sensation, and that is called perception in Buddhist perspective. But Dignaga also defined perception as pratyaksham Kalpana Bodham, which means perception is free from conceptual construction. Whereas the Nyaya school does not agree with Digna. According to them, perception involves both sensation and conception. Nyaya accepts two stages of perception, that is, indeterminate and determinate. In indeterminate stage, one can have mere sensation of an object, and in determinate stage, we come to know the name of an object. Like we can say a jug, a pen, or a pencil, or an pot. Whereas Buddhist does not accept determinate stage of perception, but they take determinate stage in the realm of inference. Because for them, perception is free from conceptual construction. Whereas for Nyayikas, language is constituted by itself. On the other hand, for Buddhists, language will come under Kalpana. Nyayikas believe that sensation and conception always go together. They cannot be separated. But for Buddhists, perception is free from conception. So these two schools totally differ on the theory of perception. Now the next controversy between these two schools is to adopting members of syllogism in inference. The Nyayika accept 5 members of syllogism, which I have said earlier. Whereas Buddhist accepts 2 members of syllogism, which I mentioned earlier. So there is a big controversy between these two schools, Nyayikas and Buddhists. So today we have learned about 2 sources of knowledge that are adopted by Buddhism, that is perception and inference, and also the controversy between the Nyayikas and the Buddhism. So that's all about the critical study of philosophy of knowledge. That's all. Thank you.